Here's Laura Dekker, the youngest person to ever sail around the world.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right. Thank you. Hi. So yes. Good midday, everybody. So my name is Laura, and yeah, when I was 14, I decided to go and sail around the world on my own. And I was 16 when I finished that trip, which made me the youngest to ever do that. And that journey is what I'm going to tell you a little bit about today. I'm just going to start with a short video so you get a little bit of an impression of the boat I had and what I saw and did. So yeah, enjoy that. one of the first questions people generally ask me is, why? Why did you want to sail around the world at such a young age? And it's a pretty good question, but to properly answer that, I have to back up a few years. This isn't my boat, this is the boat my dad built when he was in his early 20s. This was also not the first boat he built, I think it was the fourth or the fifth. So it's been in the family. Actually, my dad is the first one who started sailing, and I don't know where his love for sailing came from, but it was very deep. So in his early 20s, he met my mother at the shipyard, and they decided to sail around the world together. After a couple of years of sailing, they arrived in New Zealand, which is where I come into the picture. We lived in New Zealand for about 2 years and then continued sailing. So from that point on, I was part of the crew. Now, I don't know if it was very useful. I did like to throw stuff over the side because I was very interested in whether it would float or not. They weren't very happy with that. Anyhow, we continued sailing to Australia and further on to Indonesia. Of course, my parents had to stop a lot along the way because they had to work. Their whole trip took 7 years. And on the way, my dad worked a lot on shipyards, and he's very, very handy. So anything he could find, he would do. Now, my mom, on the other hand, is not very handy, but she is a strict performer, and here she's performing with snakes. Most generally, what she did, though, was she would do clown shows. So either in hotels or for kids, and she's actually done that up to about 5 years ago. So yeah, we went everywhere, and we explored the countries a lot. Then after a couple of years, my younger sister Kim was born. She is now 17, and she isn't as much into sailing, but this is what she does. She works in a circus and travels around Holland and sometimes Europe as well, performing, doing acrobatics and trapeze. So we have a little bit of a strange family. Now, when I was 6, my parents divorced, and my dad had already started building a new boat. This one quite a bit bigger than the previous one. It's a 65-footer, and as you can see, he started it completely from scratch. It's actually a Norwegian-type fish cutter, so it's not quite a double-ender, but it's a colonnarger type boat. So yeah, he started it when I was 6, and this is what it looks like now. It is supposed to be a sailboat, but he's not quite there yet. Last month I just helped him building his masts out of aluminium, cutting all the pieces and welding it together, so he's actually getting there. Now, you can imagine, with me growing up with my dad building this boat, I got quite inspired to build my own boat, which turned out like this. I think I was 6 at this stage, and I was very proud of my own boat, and I thought that crossing the river was a huge achievement. Now, with a little bit of help from my dad, it actually turned out to be like this. And I did sail it for quite a while, and actually quite far too. Then my dad bought me an optimist, and even later I got a mirror from a friend of my dad. Now, with that boat, I started doing competitive racing on the rivers in Holland where we were living at that time. I did quite well. So after about a year of sailing, in which I won almost all the competitions in the youth division, the leaders of the competition, they just said that I wasn't allowed to race anymore unless I would take another person on my boat, just to make the boat heavier. Now, it was kind of fair because the boat was made for 2 people, but because it was made for 2 people, I couldn't sail it on my own, so we put a steel sword in it, which weighed about 30-40 kilos. So in the end, it was the same again. But anyway, I had to take somebody with me to be able to continue racing. I didn't really want to, so instead of taking another person, I decided to take my dog with me. Which at that stage was almost bigger than me. So he sailed all the races with me. He wasn't as good a crew, but he still did pretty well. He would hang over the side, and yeah, walk around. Sometimes if he'd see sheep, he would jump off the boat and start chasing them. And then, of course, I had to stop the race and go chase the dog and get the dog again and then continue racing because I wasn't allowed to race without the dog. So it made it very interesting, but as you can see on the picture, we still did very well, and consequently, after a few years, I was completely banned from the youth division. So I continued and started sailing in this boat, which is a Hurley 700 that I borrowed from a friend of my dad. He had this boat for years, and he just never really did anything with it. It was completely green, and it needed a lot of work. So I thought, if I will do all the work on the boat, then maybe he will let me sail it. Now, I was 10 at this stage, so I didn't really expect him to say yes. But he did. So I got the boat ready again with a little bit of help from my dad and started sailing this boat. Now, I did start to race this boat as well on my own, well, together with the dog, who still wasn't very useful. He's upgraded to a life jacket here, which was very necessary. He did go over the sides a lot. As you imagine, I didn't do quite as well in the races because at this stage I was in the adult division. I did win a couple of times from my dad, which he still hears quite often. But I decided that it was just too dangerous to sail this boat on my own in races because it was quite a bit to handle, and if you're in a race you have to watch all the other boats, and after a couple of near collisions I thought, okay, I'm gonna do something else. So I started to cruise. At the age of 10 I took my summer holidays and I just sailed throughout the whole of Holland and the islands a little bit north of Holland, all just together with the dog. He was always there. Then when I was 11 I had finally saved enough money by working to buy my own little boat, which is also a Hurley 700, but a bit a different one, and actually my own. So the next question I generally get is, how does an 11-year-old kid buy a boat like that? And I did that ironically by performing on the unicycle. I was really quite good at that stage, and in the summer holidays as well, while I was sailing, I would go into towns and perform on my unicycle, and that really actually brought quite a bit of money when I was still cute. So that worked well. And also, of course, I was running newspapers and cleaning up shops and basically doing anything that I could do at that stage to earn a little bit more money. So at the age of 13, after I had pretty much seen the whole of Holland, I was ready for the next challenge, which brought me to the English Channel. I wanted to sail to England, and I thought it was a very good idea to just not tell anybody about it. Because I thought if I would, I'd probably get a no. So in one of my one-week school holidays, I prepared my boat and left to England. Now the conditions weren't really that good. This was on the way to England, and I literally could just see the front of the boat. So it was very challenging because the English Channel is a difficult piece of water to sail with all the shipping, traffic and oil rigs. I didn't have much problems though, although it was very intensely listening to all the sound signals, and the navigating wasn't that easy. But I managed fine to get to England. And then I was there for a few days, and then the police turned up. They finally found me again. My parents weren't very happy with it, but my dad actually had to come over to get me from the police station because they wouldn't let me go anymore. So he came to England and talked to the police, and then eventually, of course, my dad got me back again, and then he told me, well, if you can sail to England, you can sail back to Holland. So I see you back home. So I sailed back, and the way back was a little bit better. I didn't have as much fog. I did have a lot of wind, but it was that trip that I thought, okay, I'm ready to do this. I want to sail around the world. I had been having this dream since I was about 8 and had been really preparing for it since then. I had my whole route mapped out and I'd learned as much as I could in that time. And after that trip, I just thought, well, why shouldn't I go? I saw absolutely no reason why I shouldn't go. I had a seaworthy boat. I knew how to navigate, I had my route all planned out, I had a little bit of money saved. So yeah, there was no reason not to go. Well, of course, I was the only one who was thinking like that. So the next problem came. As soon as somebody heard about my plan, they brought it to childcare in Holland, and they just completely flipped out and thought that my parents were completely insane, and they brought it to court, and from there on things kind of started to go completely insane. A 10-month court case followed, about seven court cases actually, and it was a very tough year. I actually think the whole trip overall with the preparation, that was the hardest, because I did know how to handle oceans and difficult seas and difficult winds, but I had no clue what to do with judges and court cases and media. You know, when of a sudden there were all these people asking for interviews and they wanted to know things, and I didn't have a clue. It just came out of nowhere. So in a way, it was really much harder than the whole trip together, actually. The court decided that my Hurley 700 was too small, so I had to get a bigger boat, which turns out to be this boat. We found it kind of stowed away on the sides and repossessed, so we got it rather cheap, but a lot of work had to be done. And my dad and I worked on it for 4 months full time, and got it back to shape. Only the necessary things inside, it still looks very scruffy. But yeah, basically everything that I knew at that stage about boats I had learned from my dad. So from maintenance to engines to sailing and navigating, he had pretty much taught me all of it. So this is what the boat looked like by the end when we were done with it. So then my trip started. Well, almost. First I did a little test trip in which I got completely stuck in a fishing net, also going across the English Channel. And I was in the middle of a shipping lane, and there was absolutely no wind, and there was this ship coming straight at me. And I was running the engine, of course, to try to get out of the shipping lane, and when of a sudden the engine just stopped. And I did know, I was pretty sure it was a net. But since there was a ship coming at me, I thought, okay, I will try to start my second engine in full gear and see if maybe I can get out of the shipping lane. Of course that didn't work, and both of my engines got clogged. Yes, I've got 2 engines. One is the main engine, 40 horsepower, and the second one is just a small backup engine of 10 horsepower. But they were both completely clogged in this net, and it was the North Sea and cold and dark, and since it was just a test run, I didn't even have goggles on the boat, which I think is pretty stupid. But I didn't. I just had a knife and decided to just jump over the side and start cutting away this net. Of course, I didn't see much what I was doing, so while cutting the net, I was cutting my hands. And in the end, I managed to get the small engine freed, but the big engine was still completely clogged, and I had to get back home with a 10 horsepower engine, which took quite a while. But I got back. So this is what the boat looks like inside. It's a bit of a messy picture, but I figured it's the most accurate, so I'll just leave it with that. So Guppy is a 12-meter boat, a catch, and basically, yeah, I love her. She's not very roomy for a 12-meter boat, but you've got everything that you need. You've got a little kitchen and a navigation table and a bed to sleep and a toilet, so I really love this setup, and I've always felt really at home in her. So I started my trip finally on August 2010. I was 14 years old at that stage, and I'd sailed with my dad to Gibraltar, from where I started sailing alone. And then I crossed down to the Canary Islands and the Cape Verde and then across the Atlantic. Now the Atlantic was the first kind of bigger crossing, and since this boat was still very new to me, it was kind of the biggest challenge to get to know this boat. And we hadn't done a lot of test sails with it, so really my trip around the world was the test sail. And that proved because lots of things did break. This is the wind vane rudder that broke, which is, if you're a solo sailor, it's not a good thing for it to break. Luckily I did have some boards and things on the boat that I could fix it, but it was one of the first tests. Now when I would get to an island, I would drop anchor and step into my dinghy and go and explore. one of the main reasons I wanted to sail around the world was just because I wanted to see other countries. I wanted to see the Pacific. I wanted to get to know other people and cultures, and yeah, just broaden my vision of the world, basically. So I actually spent a lot of time on land and a lot of time in different places, and I really would go hiking inland and get to know the locals, which after looking back, I think was one of the most beautiful things, and I really learned a lot from it. I would get to know people, like these people lived in this little shack, and the first time I saw it, I thought, man, how do people like live in this little shack? It's in the middle of nowhere, and they have absolutely nothing. But yet, these were one of the most friendly people that I had ever met, and they were so much more happy than most of the people that I'd seen back home. And I wondered, how does that happen, you know? And they simply answered that they were just happy. They had everything they needed. They had their family together. They had a roof above their heads. They had enough to eat. They had water from a little waterfall. And that was absolutely all they needed. And throughout the trip, I realized that really happiness doesn't come from having materialistic things, from having a bigger boat or a big house or whatever it may be, but that it simply lies in just being completely happy with what you've got and looking at what you've got. And I think it helped me a lot on the trip as well, that I was just satisfied with just eating pasta every day and being thrown around a boat and things like that. It all became part of it, and I really started to love it. So meeting these people, I think it was just one of the jewels of my trip. So from the Caribbean, I went through the Panama Canal, which was an experience. Growing up in Holland, though, I'd seen lots of locks, and this was kind of just a bigger version of it. So it was fun, but it wasn't very scary or exciting. The exciting part was, though, that the Panama Canal brought me through to the Pacific, and that's where I actually really wanted to go to. And it was a really beautiful part of my trip. I loved the Pacific. It didn't just bring really awesome sunsets with it, but also more sea life than I'd actually seen in other places of the world. My parents told me that they saw dolphins pretty much every day on their trip, and it was quite sad for me to realize that I didn't. One time I sailed 48 days straight and I saw one dolphin. It was sad to realize that the sea life had diminished so much over just the last 20 years. But it made it even more special to see them. So I saw dolphins, but also saw lots of flying fish, lots of dead flying fish. I didn't eat them. I did get attacked by them sometimes. One time on a quiet night, I left the hatch open, and this fat flying fish, about that big, just flew straight through the hatch into my face. And honestly, it was one of the scariest moments, because I didn't know what was happening. You know, generally when I was sleeping and I heard the noise, I thought, oh, this sail is flapping, oh, we did this, or this is happening. But this flying fish, I just didn't know what was happening. I got hit, and then you hear this crazy flapping noise. Then a big fight, of course, with the flying fish followed, because I was trying to get out of my boat into water. I did manage in the end, although it might be a bit handicapped. So I also saw sharks. A lot of people ask me about sharks, and they just swim past, and then you're like, hello. And then they keep going. Really, if you don't sink your boat right at that moment or decide to go for a swim, it's not that big of a problem. I've rarely heard problems about sharks, and I have seen them, but they always just cruise past. So I went across the Pacific and towards Hivaoa. On the way to Hivaoa, actually, a big wave hit the boat, and I was not really holding myself and got smashed back into the boat. And somewhere along the flight, my foot hit something. I still don't quite know what, but it left a big gap in my foot about that deep and about that round, so obviously I couldn't walk anymore. And I was hopping around the boat like a flamingo, trying to reach everything. I had done first aid courses before the trip, but, well, it's nice that you can, put something around your foot so it stops bleeding, but you're still hopping around. And it did make the sailing a lot more challenging, I have to say. But yeah, if you're on your own, you just gotta keep going. Luckily, I did meet some really nice people in Våga that saw me hopping up along the road trying to get to the little village. And they took me to their home and they started taking care of my foot, because with the salty air and the water, it didn't heal. In fact, the wound only got bigger and bigger because it was just moist all the time. And these people were so nice to just take me to their home and start taking care of it. And actually every day they would drive down to my boat and pick me up and take care of it again. And they did that for 2 weeks until it really started getting better. And when I asked what they wanted in return, they just said, no, nothing. We just, you need help, so we just help. And I actually found that a lot on these islands, that people are very helpful and they just don't expect anything in return. I found that very beautiful. So I actually kind of raced through the Pacific because along my trip I had decided to change my route. My original plan went through the Red Sea, which by that stage was getting way too dangerous due to piracy. So I had changed my route and decided to go under South Africa, which put me very late in the season, and I had to rush through. Now, because I really wanted to see the islands much more than maintaining my boat, on the last stretch to Australia, my boat kind of started falling apart. Here my steering wheel just kind of fell off one day, which is not very handy. You kind of need a steering wheel. So I kind of put some little pieces inside the steering wheel again and put this against it, and it kind of worked. Also, on that trip, all of my sails ripped. And if it's a small rip like this, of course, I would stitch it on the boat. But on that trip, they actually all just went completely through. And it took me quite a while to get back with only half of my mainsail. But I did get to Australia, where then, of course, the big maintaining and fixing things began. So here I'm fixing the steering wheel. I actually chose deliberately on my trip to not have any big sponsors. I had sponsors for more expensive equipment like the solar panels and my dinghy and the sails, but I had no people giving me money for the trip, because I was afraid that if a company would do that, that they would take away my dream and turn it into their business, which of course was their full right, but I didn't want that to happen. And I just, it was my dream, and I figured that if I wanted to do it, I was going to have to work for it, and I did. I actually flew back a couple of times to Holland on my trip and worked there, and sometimes I worked along the trip, but it also just meant that I didn't have a lot of money, and I had to find alternative ways of doing things, which is what this picture is. I had to get the boat out of the water because the propeller broke, and I was in Australia at the time, it's insanely expensive to get the boat out of the water. So I saw these 2 poles on the beach, and luckily there's this really high tide difference. So in high tide I could go up to the poles and then wait until it's low tide, and then quickly do something on the boat until you're up in the water again, and then just go up and down a few times. But it saved a lot of money. It also meant that I didn't have very fancy navigation equipment. I did have a satellite phone in case of emergencies, but to use it would be very expensive. When I left, I basically just had the satellite telephone and my VHF. So I had not a lot of ways to communicate with home. Later on the trip, I got an SSB radio, which enabled me to send short messages home, and also to talk to other sailors, which was really nice. And especially my parents liked it very much. So yeah, I did also all the maintaining and fixing things on the boat myself. I have to say, sometimes it ended up really just being ropes and duct tape. And when I would get back to harbor and ask somebody else to help me fix it, they would look at it and think, okay. But it worked, and I learned a lot from it. I'm not a very good mechanic, but I kept it running most of the time. So yeah, of course, sailing around the world, it's all part of it, to keep your boat up and look after it. And not just the maintaining, but also the everyday life continues. You still have to do the dishes and clean up and do the laundry. And I have to admit, when I was 14 and just left, it was a little bit of a mess. But it took about 2 months before I realized that I really have to do the dishes and I really have to clean up because it just doesn't work otherwise. Cooking was another problem. I really don't like cooking. So I basically just lived off pancakes and pasta, which seemed to work fine. And I continued it, but no, I didn't have a very good diet. Rice was in there sometimes too, but I always found that my rice really looked like little, I don't know, worms or something, and then I completely lost my appetite, so I just went back to pancakes. So from Australia, I sailed straight to South Africa, which took me 48 days. It's about a 6,000-mile trip. Of course, there's islands on the way that I could have stopped at, but I decided not to, and there were actually 2 reasons for that. The first was that I was very late in the season, and I had to get to South Africa. The second was I just wanted to do it. I just wanted to sail such a long stretch without stopping. Now, the boat was absolutely not set up for it. I only had 150 liters of water in the tank, and about the same on fuel. But yeah, and only solar panels, no wind generator or anything like that. No fridge. I neither have a shower on the boat, but whoever needs one. So, especially for your own, nobody cares. But I thought it would be fun, and so I left from Australia, and it started out great with 2 weeks of absolutely no wind. Now, if there's anything worse in sailing, it's no wind. It's really the worst, and I started to so hate it. And if it's nice and calm like this, it's actually not that bad. But generally, there's still a swell, and you're just rolling around, and things just flap and break and wear and chafe through, and it really almost drove me to insanity. But I'm still pretty normal. At least I like to think so. Anyway, in the end, I was very happy when my first storm came through. It was great. We were finally moving again and bashing through waves. We were going completely the wrong way, but at least we were going somewhere. So yeah, throughout the trip, I just kind of started to love heavy weather more and more. I think also because I just started to get to know the boat really well, and I knew how to handle it really well. I felt very comfortable with the situations, and I just simply loved being out there. I remember a day when it was night and the boat was just bashing through the waves, and there was a lot of phosphorus in the sea. So all the crushing waves and going over the boats, they were all completely green. It's like the whole sea was just this massive green going around me, and I was just standing there holding this stay for hours and hours with waves bashing in my face, and it was just the most beautiful moment, and I felt so fortunate that I could be there. Now, some people thought I was completely insane when they said I completely loved being bashed by waves for hours on end. But it's just such a magical feeling. Sometimes you're out there and there's no wind and the stars are just reflecting in the sea, and it's like you're flying through a universe. And there's just moments that I've never experienced on land and that were absolutely worth it. So there were very hard moments, but there were these few moments that made everything worth it. So here I'm catching water because I didn't have a lot of water in my tank. I had to catch all the rainwater, which worked fine. And then on the Indian Ocean trip, Messi started joining me. That's the bird. I called Messi because she left not a very nice present for me. It took me about 2 days to figure out why my batteries just weren't charged anymore. So South Africa actually brought the worst storm with it. I had about 65 knots of wind, which isn't even that bad, but there's a big current going around Australia, and the wind was going against it, which makes for very steep and dangerous waves. And I basically just didn't sleep for 2 days and didn't eat and didn't leave the wheel. And it's funny, but if I think back on it, it's kind of like a blur. In the beginning, I was still nervous and like my brain was functioning well, but after a while, it's like your body just goes over in survival mode, and whatever happens, you just know you have to keep going. You're just holding that wheel, and there's just not really anything going through your mind except for, okay, holding the wheel, okay, wave here, okay, wave here. And you just keep going. It's such an insane feeling. I got to Cape Town and my dad was there, and the waves were coming so high over the boat, the spray, and the sun was just coming up and it was blinding me, so I didn't see anything while I was going into Cape Town, which is too dangerous. So I told my dad over the VHF and said, sorry, but I can't get into the harbor because I can't see anything. So I will have to turn around. And he knew that the storm was only going to get worse. So he told me that he would guide me in over the VHF. He went up on a high mountain to see where I was with a map. And told me, okay, now go a little bit here and go a little bit here, and there's a ship coming, and then go there. And eventually I did make it into the harbor, but it was quite scary, and well, luckily I did trust my dad a lot. I don't think I would have done it with anybody else. And then when I arrived, my dad just kind of picked me up from the boat and put me in a warm restaurant, and then I just sat there for a while, and it was about an hour until I was like, man, I made it. You know, I'm in Cape Town. How did that happen? You know, your brain just goes in such a strange modes, and you just do it. I can't really explain, but you just have to. So since this long distance trip went really well, I decided to do another one, and I sailed straight from South Africa back to the Caribbean, which was another 41 days. It was a little bit easier than the previous one. Of course, at night, things just keep going. I would sleep about an hour at a time and then wake up and look for ships and then just sleep another hour. Basically, yeah, whenever you can. That trip was great. I had winds from behind all the way, and that was where the flying fish attacked me. I went from South Africa and then to the equator, so through a lot of different weather systems, but the trip itself was actually fairly easy. Now, the difficult part was that it was the end of my trip. As you saw on the map before, this is where my route connects with my previous route, so it's where I had finally managed to round the globe. And it was actually a very scary moment, because somewhere along the way, the trip wasn't really about finishing anymore. I had just started to really love the sailing and to really love the traveling, that okay, it was a finish, but it wasn't really a finish in my mind. I had already found what I wanted. I had already found out what it means to sail long distances, what it means to be in a storm, or to go into a harbor at night. I had already experienced all those things, and arriving back in St. Martin, of course, made me the youngest to do it, but for some reason it didn't really mean that much to me at that time at all. It was only later when people started kind of asking me about it and saying things that I thought, yeah, it is actually kind of crazy. But back then, it just didn't come through. Another point, of course, was that it wasn't really the finish for me at all. I just kept sailing another half time around the world to continue to New Zealand, which is where I was born, and I just really wanted to see it again. And I've actually stayed there ever since. I arrived in 2012. And I still live aboard my boat in Whangarei Harbour. Of course, I've done lots of things in between. On the way I had a little cat on the last little piece of the trip. I also had a little sea lion. Well, not that little, actually. He wasn't really welcome, but hey, what do you say to somebody who's got like teeth like that? So, yeah, he just sneaked up on the boat somewhere at night, and I came out and I was like, oh, what's this big black blob? And then when I touched it, it started growling, so I thought, you're good, mate, just stay there, you know? It's all fine. And then in the morning he went fishing or something, so it was all good in the end. So this is the whole route together, leaving from Europe and then going around and then another half time around the world to New Zealand. I wrote a book about my adventures. It's in English and in German and in Dutch. It's mainly just the diary and my experiences. Also, after my trip just last year, I married, so I'm not sailing solo anymore. Luckily, he likes sailing too, and he's very good at stitching sails, so that's good. I actually managed to get my captain's license, so I'm doing a lot of deliveries, bringing boats from one place to another. Also did a lot of road trips. I went through the whole of New Zealand, and then we went through the whole of America. So I basically went from deserts to towns that were overflowing. And yeah, so I just mainly traveled a lot and just wanted to see a lot of the world and have a lot of different experiences. I meanwhile got my captain's license and sorry. Now I'm not really sure what I want to do with my life, but I definitely want to continue sailing. I'm thinking of selling my boat and maybe buying a bigger one and one that's more suitable for going to the Antarctic and kind of more remote and yeah, colder places. So there is ideas in there and I'm working on it, but yeah, for now I'm just enjoying the moment. So yeah, I've actually talked a little bit too long, I'm sorry, but thank you for listening.